A man's house is his castle.
That's Sir Edward Coke, right? From the 17th century.
Yep. An English jurist giving us this really powerful foundational idea of private liberty. But he didn't stop there. He followed it up with the Latin. Et domus sua cuique est tutissimum refugium.
Which translates roughly to, where shall a man be safe if it be not in his own house? And it's a principle that's so deep in, Western law and the American psyche, we just don't even question it.
But about 20 years ago, that very principle was tested to its absolute limit.
It resulted in this incredible David versus Goliath fight that really did change our understanding of property rights in America.
And we are diving deep into that story today. This is the saga of Susette Kelo, an EMT, a mother, fighting a Fortune 500 company, Pfizer, and a desperate local government over her small, beloved, pink cottage in New London, Connecticut.
Most people follow the law. They know the name Kelo v. City of New London. They know the dry legal facts. But our mission today is to peel back that legal varnish and get into the ground war. We're going inside the political street fight, the civil disobedience, the backroom deals, even the sheer petty vengeance that define this whole battle over eminent domain.
And this deep dive, it's not just based on court records. It's based on a true inside account. We're drawing from interviews with everyone.
Everyone. The residents whose lives were just upended, the powerful development agency, the local officials caught in the middle, the governor's office, and of course, the lawyers on both sides who took this all the way to the Supreme Court.
This is a story about community, ambition, and the real price of progress.
And it's the story of how one little pink house in a collapsing New England city became this ultimate symbol for property rights across the entire nation.
Okay, let's unpack this. We have to start with the setting, with the environment. I mean, to really get why this fight got so vicious, you have to understand the level of pure economic desperation in New London, Connecticut.
Right. It wasn't just some quiet town. It was a city in an absolute freefall, and the epicenter of that was the Fort Trumbull neighborhood.
So what was Fort Trumbull like?
Historically, it was this really tight-knit, working-class community, mostly settled by Irish and Italian immigrants in the early 1900s. And the geography is critical here.
How so?
It wasn't really integrated into the rest of the city. It was physically cut off, almost like an island, sandwiched between the Amtrak rail lines on one side and this massive naval undersea warfare center, the NUWC on the other.
So it's isolated, and its entire economy is basically tied to that one military base.
Precisely. During the Cold War, the NUWC was everything. I mean, it was the heart of submarine warfare research. It employed over 2,000 people.
But then the Pentagon closes the base in 1995.
And that entire ecosystem just collapses. The jobs, they vanish almost overnight.
And you can see the effect immediately. The sources describe the area starting to look like a ghost town.
It did. The city's unemployment rate shot up to double the statewide average. Industry had already fled, and there was just this heavy, palpable sense of hopelessness.
And that hopelessness, that's the fuel for this whole thing, isn't it?
It is. When a city gets that desperate, it becomes incredibly vulnerable to the promise of some massive, shiny revitalization project. They start to believe that the benefits, the jobs, the tax revenue, they just have to outweigh the cost to a few homeowners.
And the homes themselves. They were old, many were run down, so the property values were low, which I imagine made the eminent domain argument seem a lot easier for the government to justify, at least on paper.
Of course it did.
Okay, so into this scene of decay and desperation, let's introduce the heart of our story. It's spring of 1997, and Susette Kelo arrives.
She's 40 years old, an EMT, a mother of 5 sons. But she's looking for more than just a house. She's looking for a sanctuary.
And her reason for being an EMT was really personal, right?
Deeply personal. Paramedics had saved her son's life years earlier after a really bad drunk driving accident. She wanted to pay that forward. But she also just needed a profound change of scenery. She was in a deeply unfulfilling marriage and felt this intense need for a place that was just hers.
She spots this house, 80 Street, a little 2-story Victorian on a corner while she's out on an ambulance run. She just sees it, and something clicks.
And by all objective standards, it was a terrible house. I mean, her realtor literally called it the house that no one could sell.
Why? What was wrong with it?
Everything. It was abandoned, completely overgrown with vines, no yard, no driveway. And this is the strangest part. A giant granite boulder was just sitting in the middle of the basement.
Boulder?
A boulder. They had to excavate it later. But Susette, she was just determined. She told the realtor, "This is my house." She bought it for $56,000.
And here's a detail I love about her need for independence. She used money from their joint account, without telling her husband.
because she knew he'd fight her on it. That purchase was this profound act of self-assertion for her, and she poured everything into it, remodeling it, making it hers. It was her only possession, her refuge.
And she painted it that famous color, Odessa rose.
The little pink cottage.
And the house brings her happiness. She meets Tim LeBlanc, a professional landscaper, through just a random phone mix-up about antiques.
A total fluke. He volunteers to help her with the outside, puts in raised flower beds. They fall into a relationship, spending all their spare time together. But they decide to keep separate homes so she can have her place by the water, which was so important to her.
Her life finally is settling down.
Right. But as she's pouring her heart and soul into 8 East Street, the wheels of state government, completely unknown to her, are already turning in a massive, massive way.
And this is where the high-level politics kick in. Connecticut's Governor John G. Rowland sees New London's desperation not as a tragedy, but as a huge political opportunity.
A legacy project. But he had a problem. He didn't trust the mostly Democratic city council there.
So he goes around them.
Completely circumvents them. He runs the entire project through his close political friend, Peter Eliff, who is the head of the state's economic development department. Eliff's job was to find a fixer.
They bring in J.B. Levin, a powerful Democrat, a lobbyist, specifically to navigate the messy local politics. And the whole thing gets housed under an existing entity, the New London Development Corporation, or NLDC.
And that was a very calculated move. It was designed to avoid the usual public suspicion you get when a brand new redevelopment agency just pops up out of nowhere.
But they needed a public face, someone respectable to sell the vision.
So they picked Dr. Claire Gaudiani. She was the president of Connecticut College, super energetic, very articulate. The source material says she had an uncanny power of persuasion, and she genuinely believed this was the way to help the city's poor.
She seemed ideal. But the governor's men had one little reservation.
A nagging question, as they put it, that kind of foreshadows everything to come. Could she be controlled?
Because the entire plan hinged on one thing.
Attracting a massive corporate anchor.
And that anchor was Pfizer. The pharmaceutical giant was looking for a site for its new global research and development headquarters.
The plan was to build it on a 24-acre brownfield site, which, for anyone who doesn't know, means it was formerly contaminated industrial land. It needed a huge cleanup.
It was a tough sell. The site apparently smelled horrible because of a nearby sewer treatment plant and was next to a huge scrap metal junkyard.
Right. So the city, or rather the state, had to offer this absolutely irresistible package.
In December 1997, the state sends Pfizer a confidential assistance letter. It promises to cover development costs and improve the whole area with a state-funded waterfront project.
And here it is, the fatal clause, the one that seals the neighborhood's fate. The letter states that the NLDC would be acquiring a number of surrounding properties to make it all happen.
So this secret confidential promise to Pfizer basically guaranteed that Susette Kelo and her neighbors were living on borrowed time.
The project was conceived and promised before the residents even knew a plan existed.
So that confidential letter, it very quickly turns into visible action. In February 1998, Pfizer officially picks New London.
And there's this huge public celebration. Claire Gaudiani called it like a dream come true. And for the NLDC, there was no time to waste. They set this super aggressive timetable to acquire almost 100 properties in Fort Trumbull.
The clock starts ticking immediately.
And this is where the fight begins. Real estate agents, armed with the state's authority, just start knocking on doors.
And they get to 8 East Street, Suzette's house. They offer her $68,000.
Barely more than she paid for it when it was a wreck. She refuses.
And the agent's response?
He doesn't negotiate. He just issues the threat right then and there. The property would be taken by eminent domain.
Okay, let's break that down for a second because the legal terms here are everything. Eminent domain is the government's power to seize private property.
Right. But the Fifth Amendment puts two big limits on that power. First, they have to give you just compensation, fair market value.
And second, and this is the one that became the center of the entire national fight, it has to be for public use.
That is the key distinction. Historically, public use meant, literally that. A road, a school, a military base, something the public would actually use.
But the interpretation had been changing.
It had. Over the 20th century, a lot of courts started interpreting it more broadly as public purpose. And this is what the NLDC was banking on, the idea that generating jobs and tax revenue was a valid public purpose, even if the land ended up in private hands. like Pfizer's.
So the agents are making threats, and then Claire Gaudiani follows up with these letters, trying to sound polite.
Oh, very polite. She assured Susette they didn't want to cause unnecessary hardships and would make her move as convenient as possible. But the letter was also crystal clear. They intended to take all of the properties in the Fort Trumbull area.
Which is the bureaucratic way of saying, we're coming for your house one way or another.
Exactly. And Susette saw right through it. The source is, quote, her venting to her neighbor, she is telling me, pack up and get the F out.
So how did the actual resistance get started?
It was immediate, neighbor to neighbor. Another resident, Rich Voiles, showed Susette a similar letter, offering him $67,000 and warning that properties not already optioned will be moved into the governmental process.
And that's when she decides to go public.
That's her defining moment. She says, I'm going to bring this letter to the newspaper and everyone will see what's going on down here. She refused to be intimidated in silence.
She got some crucial encouragement from the mayor, Lloyd Beachy,
who had been totally cut out of the loop by the governor's office. He told her she had two options: take the money or stay here and fight. And he connected her with an activist named Kathleen Mitchell.
And they start the grassroots campaign, going door to door,
talking to the neighbors who were mostly elderly, scared, octogenarians who had lived there their whole lives, but they signed the letters opposing eminent domain for private profit.
But this is where the NLDC starts fighting back with basically psychological warfare.
Pure psychological warfare. Once they realized they couldn't just buy everyone out, they moved to just obliterate the neighborhood around the holdouts.
They got demolition permits incredibly fast.
And one of their own internal memos admitted the strategy was to create a sense of inevitability. They wanted the holdouts to look around and feel like they were living in a desolate wasteland.
And that bleak reality hit Suze literally. A house right behind hers was emptied.
And then it burned down. The fire wasn't officially ruled as foul play, but the timing was convenient, let's say.
And the effects were traumatic for her.
Deeply symbolic. The heat from that fire was so intense, it literally melted the Odessa rose paint off the back of her little pink house. And they didn't even clear the wreckage. The charred skeleton of the house was just left there, a constant bleak reminder in her kitchen window of what was coming.
The source material even mentions a firefighter at the scene made a pretty dark joke.
Yeah. Seeing the destruction, he quipped to Susette, this is one way to get rid of her. It was probably just black humor, but it left her feeling deeply unsettled.
So the NLDC is also fighting these political battles over their secrecy.
Oh, absolutely. Reed McCluggage, the publisher of the local paper, The Day, fought them tooth and nail on freedom of information requests after Claire Gaudiani actually tried to dictate how they should cover the Pfizer news.
And he won, right?
He won. A judge ruled the NLDC was a public agency and had to open its books. It was a huge symbolic victory because it showed how reluctant they were to be transparent.
And even the city's own lawyer was clashing with them.
City Attorney Tom Lundgren. And he actually supported the development project, but he kept clashing with Claire Gaudiani because she kept trying to circumvent the public process and expected him to basically work for her private lawyers.
He had to keep reminding her who his client was.
He literally told her, I don't work for you. My client was the City of New London. It just revealed this incredible arrogance within the NLDC.
And if that arrogance wasn't clear enough, there was the glaring political favoritism.
The Italian Dramatic Club, the IDC. This is one of the most maddening details.
So the NLDC's plan was to take every single property for the greater public good.
Except for this private, all-male social club.
Why?
Pure politics. Jay Levin, the political fixer, had made a promise to the club's president that they could stay.
Wait, hold on. They're kicking out families who live there for generations, but a private club gets a special exemption because of a backroom promise.
That's it. And Susette, absolutely furious, actually walked right into the club's basement, interrupted three guys eating cheese and drinking wine, and demanded to know what they did to stay.
Good for her.
And that political favor became critical evidence later on. It completely destroyed the city's argument that they needed every single property to assemble the land for their plan. If they could make an exception for the IDC, why not for Susette Kelo?
So that clash between the NLDC's ambition and Suzette's anger really comes to a head during a public presentation.
That's when she has her famous outburst. She just stands up and shouts, "This is bullshit." And that public defiance was the spark that galvanized the opposition.
In November 1999, the Coalition to Save Fort Trumbull neighborhood is officially formed.
And this brings everyone together. Mayor Beachy, Kathleen Mitchell, and some very credible figures, like a Connecticut college history professor named Fred Paxton.
And Paxton's involvement was a big deal, wasn't it? He'd been on the NLDC's board.
He had been a director, and he resigned his post precisely because he realized the NLDC plan was a steamroller with no alternatives, no thought given to preserving the neighborhood. His support gave them huge credibility.
So they have a coalition, they need a lawyer. Local attorneys are too scared to take the case.
So they find a young guy, Scott Sawyer, known for being willing to go against the current. But the real legal muscle, that came from outside.
A member of the coalition sends a letter to the Institute for Justice, the IJ.
Right, a libertarian public interest law firm in Washington, D.C. An IJ attorney, Scott Bullock, reads this letter describing homes being taken, not for a road, but for condos and a health club next to Pfizer.
And he sees the potential immediately.
He sees the two things they always look for. One, a cutting-edge legal issue challenging the meaning of public use of view. And two, outrageous government behavior taking homes for private profit.
And he gets an insider source who provided discovery in the most unique way I've ever heard of.
Billy Von Winkle, the deli owner. Bullock learns that Von Winkle had gotten his hands on some of the most sensitive, confidential NLDC documents by diving every night through their garbage dumpsters.
He was garbage diving.
Literally rifling through coffee grounds and trash, but he found the paper trail. He found their strategy memos, their internal communications. It gave them the unvarnished truth of the NLDC's intentions.
So armed with dumpster documents, Bullock lines up his plaintiffs, Susette Kelo, Billy Von Winkle, the elderly dairy family.
And the Cristofaro family, which was so poignant because they had already lost a previous home to eminent domain decades before.
So in December 2000, they launched the lawsuit. And Bullock, very smartly, chooses Suzette's little pink house as ground zero for the press conference.
He makes it clear. Their property is being taken not for public use, but rather as a health club, office space, and yet unnamed and unspecified development projects. Susette agrees to be the lead plaintiff, making her the public face of the whole fight.
And Billy Von Winkle brings the local humor.
Oh, the menu. At the press conference, he unveils this custom-printed deli menu with joke items like eminent domanicati and a line about relocation expenses that reads, "You can't win if you don't leave." It kept the fight relatable.
But the legal challenge itself, under Connecticut law, was incredibly difficult.
It was a huge hurdle. IJ attorney Dana Berliner discovered that under state law, the NLDC legally owned the properties the second they filed the paperwork. The only thing the homeowners could legally challenge was the amount of compensation.
So that flips the whole burden of proof. Instead of defending their homes, they have to sue the city to stop the taking.
It's a massive disadvantage. And with the demolition speeding up, they needed to buy time.
Which led to actual civil disobedience.
They had to physically stop the bulldozers. In February 2001, the IJ's communications director and a reporter actually stayed overnight in a condemned house to block its demolition.
They were technically trespassing.
They were. But the goal was to force a judge to block any more demolitions until the case could be heard.
The standoff really peaked in September 2000, with the line in the sand.
The NLDC moved to demolish more homes on East Street, and Mayor Beachy, his wife, and Kathleen Mitchell physically sat down in front of an excavator.
And they were arrested.
And they watched from the back of a police car as a 100-year-old house was just turned into splinters. Susette was in a state of shock. She went back to the site and just started trying to sweep up the mess, crying.
That must have been just a devastating moment.
It was. But there was this small act of empathy. The foreman of the demolition crew saw her distress, and he refused to keep working while she was there. It just highlighted the immense human cost of this whole strategy.
So as they're heading to trial, the depositions are key. And Claire Gaudiani's testimony was not great for the city.
It was a complete disaster. Claire, the face of the NLDC, claimed she had no day-to-day responsibilities. She came across as evasive, condescending. She even lectured the attorneys questioning her.
She admitted she hadn't even read the main development plan.
Hadn't read the foundational document, the very plan justifying taking all these homes. When they pressed her for simple yes or no answers, she tried to use what she called French logic. It was pure hubris.
Meanwhile, the city's lawyer, Tom Londrigan, he had a very straightforward defense.
His argument was simple. Connecticut law explicitly allows economic development as a public use. New London is a depressed city. It needs this 90-acre project to create jobs and tax revenue for the greater good. In his view, the cost to a few homeowners was just the necessary price of progress.
When the trial judge, Thomas Cordino, gives his ruling in March 2002, he tries to split the difference.
He does. He rules that the city's development plan did generally count as a public use under the state's broad definition. That was the bad news for the homeowners.
But there was good news.
He split the decision. He ruled the NLDC could not take the properties in a specific area, Parcel 4A, which included Suzette's Pink House and Von Winkle's properties,
Why not?
because the NLDC had failed to specify exactly what its intended use for that land was. He basically said, I agree with your broad principle, but you were too vague and grasping in this specific instance.
So Susette won. She got to keep her house, at least for a while.
She said she felt richer than she'd ever been. But it was only a partial victory. He allowed the takings in another area, Parcel 3, where uses like parking and office space were clearly laid out. So some plaintiffs, like rich buyers, still lost their homes.
And that temporary victory, it was immediately appealed by the city.
And in March 2004, the Connecticut Supreme Court reversed Cordino's decision. In a very close 4-3 ruling, they sided with the city of New London.
And their ruling was definitive.
It was. It explicitly endorsed Londrigan's core argument. Economic development is a valid public use for eminent domain in Connecticut. And with that, the homeowners lost their last local hope.
Now, before we get to the U.S. Supreme Court, there was this strange internal conflict among the opposition groups, right? Something about money.
Yeah, this is a fascinating little side drama. The opposition wasn't one big happy family. While Susette and others were fighting for their homes, a separate group called the Fort Trumbull Conservancy had formed, funded by some wealthier property owners.
And the issue was that this group paid their lawyer, Scate Sawyer, a lot of money.
At least $600,000. When this came out, it created a lot of internal friction. It kind of muddied the waters of this pure David versus Goliath story and made it harder for Mayor Beachy to mediate a settlement.
So it turned a pure rights fight into something a little messier. But while all this was happening, the political battle was going national.
Absolutely. The Institute for Justice released this huge comprehensive study called Public Power, Private Gain. And it was damning. It documented over 10,000 cases of eminent domain abuse for private gain in just 5 years.
And that study got a lot of attention.
It became the basis for a blistering segment on 60 Minutes. Suddenly, the whole country realized that the New London fight wasn't some local squabble, it was a nationwide epidemic.
And that national attention gave them the momentum they needed to petition the U.S. Supreme Court.
Which is always a long shot. I mean, you have maybe a 1% chance of your case being heard. But then they got this incredible, unexpected break.
What happened?
The timing was just perfect. Days before the Supreme Court was set to consider their petition, the Michigan Supreme Court overturned a famous decision called Pulltown, which had allowed the city of Detroit to take a whole neighborhood for a General Motors plant.
So why was a Michigan case so important for a Connecticut case?
Because it created what lawyers call a circuit split. You had two state Supreme Courts with opposite rulings on a major constitutional question, the meaning of public use. And when that happens, the U.S. Supreme Court is much more likely to step in to resolve the confusion.
So the odds changed.
The city's own lawyer estimated their odds of being accepted jumped from 1% to 10% overnight. And in September 2004, the court accepted Kelo v. City of New London.
The plaintiffs must have been ecstatic.
They were convinced they were finally going to win.
So we get to the oral arguments in February 2005. And the IJ lawyers, they go right for the city's weak spot.
What Scott Bullock called their Achilles heel, the central question. If economic development is enough to justify taking someone's home, where does it start?
And the justices hammer the city's lawyer, Wes Horton, with this one hypothetical.
It's the one that defined the entire case. Justice Scalia and Justice O'Connor basically ask him, is it okay for a city to take a Motel 6 just because a Ritz-Carlton would pay more in property taxes?
You're replacing one private business with a richer private business, just for the city's financial benefit.
It's the whole argument in a nutshell. And this is where Horton makes this fatal concession. He'd been coached that he couldn't hedge, that he had to give a straight answer.
And he did.
He eventually had to admit it. Yes, Your Honor, that would be okay.
Wow. That admission right there, it basically confirmed everyone's worst fears, that your property rights are only as secure as the highest bidder's offer to the city.
It was a devastating rhetorical loss, no matter what the legal outcome was. It proved the point.
And yet, despite that, the legal outcome went the other way. On June 23, 2005, the Supreme Court ruled against them, 5-4.
A narrow, crushing defeat. Justice Stevens wrote the majority opinion, basically saying there was no basis for exempting economic development from our traditionally broad understanding of public purpose. He deferred to the city's plan.
The fight was over. The city had won.
But then came the dissent. And Justice Sandra Day O'Connor's dissent was one of the most powerful, stinging critiques I have ever read. She called the decision a breathtaking expansion of government power.
And she used that same analogy, the Motel 6.
She put it right in her dissent. She wrote, "Nothing is to prevent the state from replacing any Motel 6 with a Ritz-Carlton." And that line instantly became the rallying cry for property rights advocates everywhere.
So the city's lawyer, Tom Londrigan, he summed up the irony perfectly. He said, "I thought I won, but nobody cares. America doesn't accept what the Supreme Court said."
He was right. The decision sparked this nearly universal outrage across the entire political spectrum. The legal battle was lost, but the cultural war was just beginning.
So the Supreme Court gives the NLDC the legal green light to take the properties.
Yeah.
But Susette Kelo and the others, they don't move.
Not an inch. Susette, fueled by all this public outrage, promises to go on every talk show she can find and tell her horror story.
And the Institute for Justice, they immediately seize on the ruling's toxicity.
They launched this massive nationwide reform campaign called Hands Off My Home. I mean, ironically, that Supreme Court loss was the greatest recruitment tool they could have ever asked for.
But the NLDC leaders, a couple of guys named Goebel and Joplin, they respond with just outright vengeance.
Suzette's little pink house had become this national symbol of defiance, and they were desperate to bulldoze it. They felt that if the symbol was still standing, their victory was meaningless.
They even admitted the house wasn't strictly necessary for the plan anymore.
But its demolition was clearly about sending a message, an act of political vengeance. They issued immediate eviction notices, a move so reckless it actually violated a state moratorium on new condemnations that had been put in place right after the Kelo decision.
And that extreme action finally triggered the political backlash they'd avoided for years.
It shocked everyone, the city council, even Governor Rell's office. The NLDC looked like this unelected, unaccountable body that had just run wild. It was a PR nightmare.
And it led to their downfall.
It did. The agency had to rescind the notices, and eventually the state demanded Goebel and Joplin's resignations just to save the NLDC from being completely dissolved.
But while the NLDC was tearing itself apart, the personal toll on the homeowners was it was immense.
Crushing. In 2002, right in the middle of all this, Suzette's partner, Tim LeBlanc, had a horrible car accident and suffered a permanent brain injury. He racked up over $300,000 in medical bills.
And Susette married him, right?
She married him quickly just to get him on her health insurance, and she became his full-time caregiver. So on top of fighting the biggest property rights case in the country, she's dealing with this unbelievable personal crisis.
Just survival mode.
Total survival mode. And other tragedies hit the group. Matt Derry's elderly mother died. Billy Von Winkle's son was murdered. The sheer strain of living in a demolished ghost town, combined with all this personal calamity, it finally started to break their will to fight.
So Governor Rell, seeing the national embarrassment and the legal costs piling up, finally sticks in to force a settlement.
The state commits a huge amount of money, over $4 million in the end, to just make this go away. And the businessmen, like Billy Von Winkle and Rich Beyer, they eventually accepted the offers.
It was a business decision for them at that point.
It was. Von Winkle got $1.8 million. They had to break even after a decade of litigation, and their properties were basically worthless, surrounded by rubble.
But Susette, the lead plaintiff, she had one final, really powerful condition for her settlement.
She didn't want to stay in the ruined neighborhood, but she was still terrified of some kind of violent standoff, so she proposed this beautiful, elegant solution.
What?
She said she would agree to leave, but only if the state paid to physically move her little pink house. And she wanted them to compensate her enough to find a new home, and this is the key part, to make sure the Cristofaro family was taken care of too.
So she used her leverage, not just for herself, but for her neighbors.
It was her last act of community advocacy. And the state deputy brokering the deal, Ron Angelo, he was so impressed by her grit, he even admitted his own daughter was siding with her for a school project. He made the deal happen.
So in the summer of 2007, they actually moved the house.
Disassembled it, board by board, and moved it to another part of the city. A year later, it was dedicated as a historic landmark, a permanent emblem of the fight.
And Susette.
She found a small, renovated bungalow in Groton, right across the river from Fort Trumbull, on a hill overlooking the water. From her own doorstep, she can literally look across the river and see the empty field where her home used to be.
And that's the final astonishing outcome. The plaintiffs all left. Governor Rowland went to prison on unrelated charges. Claire Gaudiani and the NLDC leadership were all gone.
And the land. The entire 90-acre area that was cleared at such immense financial and human cost for economic development, it remains to this day mostly undeveloped, just a massive vacant field.
The story of Susette Kelo and her little pink house, it really is the quintessential collision, isn't it? Between a government's desperate need for economic growth and this fundamental right to own your own property.
The Supreme Court, in that narrow 5-4 decision, they gave the government the legal authority. They effectively widen the definition of public use to mean public purpose.
But the real victory, at the end of the day, belonged to public opinion.
Absolutely. The Kelo decision was so widely condemned, so politically toxic, it just galvanized this near-unanimous national anger. And the Institute for Justice launched their Hands Off My Home campaign, and the response was just staggering.
It was a true cultural win.
It was. In the years right after the ruling, 45 states passed new laws or adopted constitutional amendments to curb the use of eminent domain for purely economic development.
So they essentially narrowed the definition of public use back to what most people thought it was.
They did. They required a finding of actual blight, or that the land be used for a direct public project, like a road or a hospital. So, in a way, the states, responding to the people, effectively overturned the functional impact of the Supreme Court's decision.
It's the highest expression of the public pushing back against an institution they felt had just betrayed that core principle that a man's house is his castle.
Right.
But that final crushing irony is just etched into the landscape of New London itself. That 90-acre site was totally cleared.
Yeah.
Houses, businesses, a whole community at a cost of nearly $80 million in state funds and legal fees.
And yet, the land is still largely vacant. The jobs never came, the tax revenue never flowed, the big, shiny development never showed up.
So what does it take for a city to recognize the value of what it already has, a stable, historic, even if it's a low-income community, versus chasing this high-stakes, big-money development dream?
What really defines progress when a victory in the highest court in the land still leaves your city with a moral, a financial, and a physical vacuum? That question, just like the memory of the little pink house, it still stands tall over that empty field in New London.